I've lived on this land for near 50 years. It's not a mansion or a fancy place with imported tiles and fountain driveways like the folks who moved in up the hill. But it's mine. 16 acres tucked along a shallow creek, surrounded by cottonwoods and old oaks, passed down from my granddad, who built the original cabin with his bare hands. I always figured that as long as I paid my taxes and kept the fence mended, the world would leave me be. That was before the HOA came sniffing around. The trouble started when a new development sprang up across the ridge. What used to be rent got carved up into tidy plots with stamped concrete, sidewalks and mailbox clusters that all looked like they came from the same catalogue. They called it Creekstone Hollow. Gated entry, weekly lawn inspections, monthly newsletters printed on thick, glossy paper like it was the Constitution. And wouldn't you know it, those folks thought they'd landed in some kind of gated utopia. Now, my land isn't even in their jurisdiction. Not legally, not by parcel, not by zoning, nothing. But that didn't stop them from acting like I was the last loose thread in their tapestry. I got a whiff of it early on, when they invited me to a community integration barbecue and handed me a folder full of bylaws and architectural guidelines. I told them, real polite, thanks, but I don't live in Creekstone Hollow. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Enter Karen. Her real name's Marcia de Lacroix, but everyone calls her Karen. Even her own HOA board, I'd come to learn. She moved in 6 months after the development opened. Tall, severe, with a haircut sharp enough to slice through drywall and a little designer dog that barked like a squeaky door hinge, she appointed herself president of the HOA within 2 weeks of moving in. After staging what I heard was a coup at the clubhouse potluck over too many gluten items on the buffet, first time she came down to my property, I was clearing out some dead brush along the creek. She stood on the edge of my land, one of those glittery water bottles in her hand, waving like she was at a parade. Hi there, I'm Marcia, HOA president. We're planning a community camp for the kids this summer, and we think this creek would be perfect. I raised an eyebrow. You mean my creek? Well, it runs next to our lots, and we noticed it isn't being utilized. The board voted unanimously that this would be a great nature opportunity for our neighborhood youth. Imagine s'mores, creek wading, crafts. No, her smile froze, just for a second, like a glitch in the Matrix. I'm sorry, I said no, this land's mine, and I ain't signing off on any camps. She sniffed, looked around. Like she'd stepped in manure. Well, we'll see if we can get the county to designate it as a shared natural asset. After all, community outreach is very important. I didn't say anything else. Just gave her a little tip of my hat and went back to my brush pile. A week later, the signs went up. Creekstone Explorers Summer Nature Camp, future site, coming soon. They staked M right across the bank, right where the creek bends behind my tool shed. And they weren't cheap poster board signs either. These were full-color printed placards with logos, maps, and little cartoon deer. I about choked on my coffee. I marched up to the main office of the Creekstone HOA, a fake Tudor-style building that looked more like a golf course clubhouse than anything else. A teenager with braces and an iPad offered me complimentary cucumber water while Karen swanned out in a pink linen pantsuit like she'd just returned from a donor luncheon. Can I help you? She asked, in a tone that already said she hoped the answer was no. Take down the signs, I said. Now. Her expression shifted into that polite knife tone. The camp is for community enrichment. We've already filed a petition to classify that stretch of land as shared access due to water flow proximity and recreational need. There's precedent. I stared at her. That's private land, Karen. My land. My deed goes back 3 generations. You come onto it again, you're trespassing. She scoffed. Well, someone didn't attend the zoning adjustment hearing because there was no notice, no mailer, no call. Just a sly maneuver by a power-hungry woman with too much time and not enough boundaries. The next week, the bulldozer showed up. I was in the barn fixing a busted latch when I heard it, the low guttural rumble of diesel and the crack of wood. I ran outside and saw it, a damn backhoe carving a flat space near the creek bed. They'd started clearing brush, ripping out saplings, flattening the soil like they were building a parking lot. There were workers in orange vests hammering in little pink flags, and someone was hauling over a porta-potty. I lost it. I stormed down the hill, waving my arms, yelling at the guy in the cab to cut the engine. When he finally did, I demanded to know who hired them. HOA, contract, he said. Like that explained anything. Got a permit on file. Permit my foot. I called the sheriff. He came out, clipboard in hand, trying to play peacemaker. Said, it was all a confusing situation, and that he'd follow up with the county. Karen came down mid-argument, clutching some manila folder, and telling the officer that I was being emotionally aggressive. Emotionally aggressive. You're trespassing, I told her, pointing at the ground beneath her wedge heels. You and every last shovel here are on my land. She smirked. I doubt it. The waterline has shifted in the past few years. We have a civil engineer's report that says the active creek bed is now part of the commons. You should have built a fence if you wanted to keep people out. I looked at her dead in the eye. I will, and I did. That night, I stayed up until 2 a.m., going through my granddad's dusty old filing cabinets. I found the survey maps, title insurance docs, the 1978 handwritten deed from when he purchased the bottom 2 acres. Then I called my cousin Jake, who just so happens to be a land use attorney, and by sunrise we were planning a legal blockade. Meanwhile, the HOA kept building. They put in benches, strung up rope bridges made of nylon and plywood planks. They even had the gall to install a little wooden archway with Creekstone Explorers welcome you carved in it. When I tried to take a photo for evidence, some HOA board member tried to block my camera, saying I wasn't authorized media. You better believe I started documenting everything, every nail, every vehicle plate, every inch of encroachment. Then, the rain came. See? That creek may look shallow most of the year, but when the rains hit hard, like they did in mid-May, it rises fast. All that junk they built wasn't up to code. Not floodproof, not even SEPME permitted, and you could bet your best boots that none of those kids would be safe near it during even a light storm. And sure enough, 3 days into camp season, with a dozen kids running around unsupervised and 2 clueless teen counselors taking selfies, the county finally stepped in. It wasn't me who called, it was Mrs. Dorsey, one of the HOA's own residents. Her grandson nearly twisted his ankle. On an exposed rebar near the rope bridge, she tried to raise concerns at the HOA board meeting, and Karen told her, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So she went around Karen, straight to the county. I'll never forget the sight. For government, trucks, 2 code enforcement officers, 1 environmental health rep. They came rolling down the hill like the cavalry. Clipboards, cameras, hard hats. The whole circus. Karen came out screeching like a kettle on full boil. You can't just shut us down. We have community approval. This is an attack on property values. One of the inspectors calmly told her that not only was the camp but it violated 3 different environmental protection ordinances. The creek was classified as a sensitive habitat corridor, meaning any construction within 20 feet of its banks required state-level approval. Karen turned on me, in front of everyone. This is your fault. You lured them here. You don't care about children, or nature, or community. I just leaned on my fence post and said should have read the deed. The camp was shut down that day. All structures had to be removed within 72 hours. Fines were issued, investigations opened, and Karen, she wasn't done throwing tantrums. But I wasn't done either, because what I uncovered next would shake Creekstone Hollow to its little faux brick foundations. After the camp was shut down, you'd think that would have been the end of it. That any reasonable person, or even a halfway rational HOA board, would have packed up their craft tents and clipboards and quietly backed away. But that's the thing with people like Karen, they don't go away, they double down. Then they scream when it all collapses on their heads. It was about a week after the county issued their stop work order, when I got the envelope, certified mail from the Creekstone Hollow HOA Legal Committee, which sounded about as official as a Monopoly card. Inside was a neatly worded demand letter, accusing me of willfully obstructing neighborhood enrichment activities, and stating that the HOA would be filing for adverse possession of the Creekside area unless I provided proof of my deed. Within 10 business days, I just stared at it. Adverse possession. On a property I had mowed, maintained, fenced, and fished on for 5 decades. I poured myself a cup of strong black coffee and called Jake again. "Time to go nuclear," I said. Turns out, Karen had been gambling on a technicality. She thought if she could convince the board, and maybe enough neighbors, that the land was public use adjacent, she could claim it had been neglected or common area adjacent, and therefore open to claim. What she didn't count on was my granddad's habit of documenting every fence post, every flood marker, and every tax receipt with the precision of a NASA engineer. Jake compiled everything into a tight little packet, stamped and notarized, and we hand-delivered it to the county assessor's office. Not only did it confirm that the land was 100% mine creek, bank, and floodplain, but it also revealed something even better. The HOA had extended 10 full feet into my property. When they built their rope bridge and benches, not just a violation, a liability, I could have sued them into next Tuesday, but I didn't, not yet. Instead, I did something worse. I let the county handle it, and boy did they dot. The environmental officer, Ms. Tran, came back 2 days later, with an official notice of hazard removal. It stated that the HOA would be responsible for all costs of dismantling, restoring and remediating the affected habitat, or face daily fines up to $2,000 per day. The kicker? They had to hire an environmental restoration firm approved by the county. Not just some handyman with a rake and a wheelbarrow. The bill for that. Over $63,000. I was sipping lemonade on my porch when Karen stormed up my gravel path, like a fashionista tornado. No warning, no appointment, just fury in designer sunglasses. "You think you've won," she shrieked. "You've destroyed something beautiful." Those kids needed that camp. They needed safety, I said calmly. And your HOA needed permission, which it never had. She pointed a trembling manicured finger at me. "This is war." I raised an eyebrow. "No, Karen, this is paperwork." She flinched like I'd slapped her. From that day on, things spiraled fast in Creekstone Hollow. Turns out a few residents had been uneasy about Karen for months, but it took this disaster for them to start organizing. Mrs. Dorsey started a petition to remove her from the board. A couple of dads who worked construction showed up at the next HOA meeting waving pictures of their kids wading ankle-deep in muddy, unsafe waters. One mum broke down in tears over the fine print of the waiver. Karen made them sign a waiver. That turned out to be legally worthless. Karen tried to rally the board, claimed she was the victim of a coordinated smear campaign, that the county was overreaching, and that I was colluding with environmental radicals to sabotage her vision. Her downfall came during a public town hall meeting, called by the county, to address the HOA's misuse of unpermitted land. The room was packed. Local news cameras, angry residents, curious neighbors. Even the mayor showed up for a few minutes. Karen took the microphone first, delivered a passionate speech about revitalizing natural spaces for youth empowerment. Said she was inspired by Jane Goodall, even quoted Robert Frost. Then Jake stepped up, holding a large foam board with a map of the parcel lines, including historical overlays from 1953 to the present. Each one showed the same thing, that the Creekstone camp was 100% on privately owned land, mine, and that its construction had caused minor but measurable erosion along the downstream bank. He closed with, "This isn't just illegal, it's dangerous, and it sets a precedent that private property can be overridden by HOA whims. If you want to build a camp, do it the right way. Get the permits, get the permission, or stave off people's land." The crowd applauded. Karen tried to interrupt, but it was over. The county revoked the HOA's access to any adjacent wildlands until further notice. A $12,000 fine was placed against their discretionary fund, and Karen, she was voted out in a landslide. 2 weeks later, I watched from my back porch as a crew dismantled the last bits of the Creekstone Explorer's archway. I found one of the cartoon deer signs washed up on my bank, sun-faded and cracked, and I hung it in the barn. As a reminder, the HOA tried to do damage control, of course, sent around newsletters with words like community healing and leadership transition. The new board president, a retired schoolteacher named Arnold, actually came down to meet me in person. He brought coffee cake, apologized, said he hoped we could coexist better. I told him I had no issue with neighbors, just folks who didn't respect boundaries. We shook hands, and that might have been the end of it, except for one final cherry on top. During the county's review, they uncovered a minor zoning violation in Creekstone's original layout, a misplaced utility easement, one that passed directly under the HOA's new pickleball courts and bocce area. The development company had rounded the property lines to make room for amenities, which meant the HOA didn't just invade my creek, they were technically in violation of their own subdivision plan. The county froze all expansion plans and mandated a correction survey, which, long story short, meant a bunch of Karens. Pet projects got scrapped or postponed indefinitely. The shiny little outdoor kitchen she'd pushed for, gone. The planned community garden with engraved donor bricks, cancelled, and the HOA had to issue partial refunds to every resident for the amenities fee they'd collected under false pretenses. You could practically hear Karen screaming from across the ridge. Wish I could say she moved out, but no, she's still up there, still patrolling her street like a hawk with a clipboard. But she doesn't come near my property anymore. Not since I put up a real, proper ranch fence with clear markers, engraved with private property in 6-inch letters. One post even has a little deer carved into it. For old time's sake, as for me, I still walk the creek every morning. Still fish when the trout are biting. Still mend the fence when the wind kicks up. But now, when I pass that stretch where they tried to build their little empire, I smile, because it reminds me of something my granddad used to say. People who don't respect land don't last long on it. And he was right. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around. I've got more wild HOA tales coming your way. Some are shocking, some are sweet, but all of them 100% real feeling.